My water.
Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And today kicks off a series that we'll be doing on both sides of the football. We're going to start with the most important and arguably the most fun side of the football field, and that's the offensive side. And the series is going to be talking about like the Mount Rushmore of each position group. Some position groups will combine into one episode just because there isn't necessarily a lot to talk about compared to the other positions. And I think that's why we have one episode for the quarterback position today. So Mount Rushmore, top four quarterbacks, the criteria. Like I love, and we'll kind of get into some of the older quarterbacks that really did impact the history of the game. But going from a passing era, or when we look at the NFL heading towards a cornerstone of using the forward pass as a means of generating more production than handing off the football to a running back or a tailback. So because of that, we're looking at more quarterbacks that came from 1970 onward. And then the other two, I think, questions that we're looking to answer, and we will be using a lot of advanced or just counting statistics to make our arguments for the four quarterbacks we're going to put on our Mount Rushmores. But can you talk about the history of the NFL or the history of the quarterback position without referencing this player? And then how impactful were they on the evolution of the game? So those are kind of the criteria, the things that we're looking at when we talk about our four quarterbacks. So kind of want to kick it off to you, Jacob. How was your weekend, Memorial Day weekend? And then we'll hop right in with the main topic.
Weekend was good. Decent weather. Today kind of dampened that, I guess. Like it was raining from, I don't know, midnight till it's still raining where I'm at least. So very dreary day, but the weekend was good. Ready to talk about quarterbacks. And I like how you laid it out. None of the Terry Bradshaws are going to make this list, right? A lot of winning for him, but best thing he did was hand the ball off. We're looking for more passers, and we can add some runners, but they got to be the ones running the ball, not somebody where you just sit there and take the snap. Here you go. They have to do it.
Yeah, and to your point, I would love in this case, like an Otto Graham, had we seen him play in the modern NFL, he might have been a superstar. Like he really was that dominant presence for the Browns back in the 40s and 50s. Johnny Unitas, you saw his impact on the game with the Colts early on, even winning MVPs in a Super Bowl. Roger Staubach with the Cowboys, phenomenal quarterback in his own right. And then Fran Tarkenton with the Minnesota Vikings. He helped them go to 3 of their 4 Super Bowl losses. I think if he had won a Super Bowl or 2, he would be talked about with the greats a little bit more, especially with just how he impacted the game from his mobility. I think he was really one of those guys that introduced kind of more that dual threat aspect from the quarterback position, which was great to see. I think guys that came up just short that have really, I wouldn't say anything to do with era, that fit the criteria that we talk about, did some great and prolific things as a quarterback, are guys like John Elway, Brett Favre, Drew Brees, quarterbacks that went to Super Bowls, won MVPs, broke records, set records. I think Drew Brees has the most 5,000 passing yard seasons than anybody. And then Brett Favre won 3 MVPs in the 90s. John Elway went to 5 Super Bowls. Just some crazy, crazy numbers to think about and look at with those guys. But again, they just came up just short. And were there any other guys before we get into kind of the top 4 who we think are in the top 4 that you think just kind of made that cutoff or missed that cutoff?
Yeah, I would think Steve Young in terms of the dual threat ability. He's also a good winner, right? A couple Super Bowls there. As far as dual threat goes, Cam Newton as well. I think he has accolades, but not as many high value accolades, like only 1 MVP. He has 1 offensive player of the year, rookie of the year, that kind of thing. But I think he really revolutionized like power running from the QB position, like you see Josh Allen do today. Jalen Hurts, to a degree, when he's not getting tush push, when he gets out in space, he can power run. Like he showed that a little bit early in his career. So I think those two guys really helped set the stage for a lot of the mobile QBs today. Michael Vick as well. Just as far as being a different level of athlete behind the line of scrimmage, to where you have like I don't even know how to explain it. Like he was as elusive as a running back or as a wide receiver from that position, but he also had a really, really strong arm. And while some of the dual threat QBs today, I think, are better players than Michael Vick was, I think he was the first real flashy but with substance kind of player like that. And it's allowed players like Lamar Jackson today to be as good as they are. Players like Kyler Murray, who I don't think he's as athletic as Jackson or as Michael Vick was, but he can do his thing. Like you can't have the fast, quick running QBs today without Michael Vick setting the stage back in the early 2000s.
And I'd argue before him, Randall Cunningham with the Eagles. Right. And those were two special players in their own right. But offenses at this point, it was like you were shifting from a more run-heavy, run-focused to like this pass-heavy approach. What I liked with when you go back and watch Randall Cunningham, it's very similar to a lot of the run-heavy offenses now, where it's you run the ball, and then you open up that play-action deep shot, because these guys had cannons for arms, and that went with Mike Vick as well, and we saw him work wonders with Andy Reid in Philadelphia. So those guys laying the groundwork, we'll probably have to do a separate episode for like the Mount Rushmore of dual threat quarterbacks, because unfortunately, up until I would say probably our current era, there haven't been a lot of quarterbacks that were a dual threat that were top 3, top 5 at their position for a duration of time. And so having a guy like Lamar Jackson nowadays, like that kind of changes the landscape. And he could maybe vie for that spot in 20 to 25 years. At the end of the episode, we'll talk about kind of the future and who has a chance to make it in. But let's start with the definitive guys on Mount Rushmore. And I think the two guys that we don't have a dispute with on who's there, it's Tom Brady and Joe Montana. And when you look at Tom Brady, the 7 Super Bowls, you can't argue with it. It's the most all time. What he did with Bill Belichick in New England was really second to none. You could argue the first 3 Super Bowls were mainly defense and late game heroics. But when you start looking at what he did in the 2010s with Rob Gronkowski and the pieces he had to work with, nothing short of a miracle. I mean, 2014, coming back from a 10-point deficit, the 28-3 speaks for itself. And then wrapping up with probably the worst out of all of Super Bowl wins, the grudge match against the Rams in 2018. But like when you're winning just so many Super Bowls and going to so many conference championship games, and you set pretty much all the records between passing yards, passing touchdowns, et cetera, it's hard to like argue against he's the GOAT. My question is why for you is Montana on this list? This is a guy that hasn't played since like the 80s. And I think he's really like one of the only quarterbacks not in the modern era on this list for both of us.
For sure, right? You talked about all that Tom Brady stuff, right? Excellent player. Even in his Super Bowl losses, he's performed. I'm thinking about the Eagles one. He put on a show. The Eagles just put on a bigger show and were a more complete team at that point. All of this stuff to say, people weren't talking about Tom Brady like the GOAT even when he was winning in the 2010s. It was, well, he still might not have done enough to pass Joe Montana yet. Well, we still got to see a little bit more. He's officially passed him. I don't think anybody's legacy from the quarterback position will – Mahomes might have a chance, but anyone else, nobody's going to come close to that level of dominance, extended dominance too. Like this wasn't just 7 Super Bowls in 12 years or something. He played for 22 years or 23 years. Like really, really good player. Montana was the guy before him though. Like it was, who's going up against Montana? Can Peyton Manning catch Montana? Can Tom Brady catch Montana? And then all the people before, they like sat at Montana's feet. It's because those dominant runs with the 49ers. I don't think he was as talented, let's say, as a guy like some of the guys that we'll talk about or that we have talked about, like in terms of arm talent. He wasn't as athletic, but he performed well for an extended period of time, won the Super Bowls that he did, won his MVPs. And then I think even when he went to, it was the Chiefs, right? After his time with the Niners, he was still a good quarterback. Like he didn't fall off the map or anything, but when you're talking legacies, you can't ignore what Joe Montana did in terms of winning. Like, I think we try to think of how these quarterbacks evolved the game and what they brought specifically to the quarterback position or to the NFL. Well, I don't think Montana brought as big an impact as somebody like Patrick Mahomes or Dan Marino or Aaron Rodgers, but he was a sustained winner, and that kind of culture that he built in San Francisco, I think that's what he brings to the conversation.
When you talk about the intangibles that Joe Montana brings, it's along the same, like I would say, like grain of a Terry Bradshaw, a Troy Aikman. Heck, I threw in Roger Staubach earlier. That leadership where you raise everyone else around you. And obviously Brady did that too. The greats all have that ability to elevate talent with them. That's what makes them elite and puts them in these conversations. But when you look at what he did for the 49ers organization, is he turned it completely around with Bill Walsh. Like nobody really cared or knew who the 49ers were up until that point. Like he was a kid out of Notre Dame that came and changed that complete franchise. And with him and Jerry Rice and that coaching staff, they were able to go win 4 Super Bowls. And he was 4-0 in the Super Bowl. Like he does not have a blemish. He kind of was the Michael Jordan of his era when you compare it to Tom Brady. Now, obviously, LeBron James hasn't passed Michael Jordan in rings, and that's why the argument's still kind of back and forth, where it's pretty definitive now since Brady has just simply done more. And like you said, 22 years, you could split it up into 3 sections. And I've seen the graphics, I've seen the visuals, I know you have, where it's like each of those 3 segments could be a Hall of Fame career in and of itself. And that just speaks volumes to just the separation and gap that I think was created from about 2014 onwards with Brady and Montana. With Montana, it just goes back to, I think, just the Joe Cool. Like, I know everybody says that about Joe Burrow, but that element of what we just saw with Jaden Daniels in the playoffs this past year, like that is what he brought. Like he brought that big time approach back in the 80s. And he was the guy that out-dueled Dan Marino in the Super Bowl. Dan Marino's only Super Bowl appearance after winning his only MVP. Like, there were some really good matchups all throughout his career. And obviously he played with a... Are we back?
Yeah. Are you good?
I think so. I think we had some technical glitches. We have. I need to look at better Wi-Fi, because I think you guys that listen, you'll hear like blips that'll go out and cut. But to get back on the rant about Montana, even though when you look at his all-time sack percentage, I think one of the best things he did was similar like what Patrick Mahomes or a guy said with Fran Tarkenton. It's his just elusiveness in the pocket and just being able to manipulate that to a way to find the open receiver, to dodge a potential sacker. That element, I think, is something that isn't talked about enough with his game, because again, he played with such a talented and loaded roster. But now I think we get to the other 2 spots on Mount Rushmore. And for you, who deserves spot number 3? And we aren't ranking these spots, but who for you deserves, after Tom Brady, Joe Montana, 2 of the all-time greats, 2 of the most winning Super Bowl quarterbacks? Because when you go down the list, it's Brady with 7, Montana and Bradshaw 4, and then everybody else.
Right. And you actually mentioned who I'm going to talk about next. It's Dan Marino. And I know Marino doesn't have the Super Bowl win. I think he has the lone MVP, if I'm not mistaken. But at that time, like, there were so many different publications that gave out MVPs. So he has like 5 MVP awards, but they're all within 1984. I think what Marino brought to the game is very similar to how we think about Brett Favre. How do we think about Brett Favre? Gunslinger, right? Like, he was throwing it downfield no matter what happened. But even further back than Favre, Marino really introduced the high volume passing into the quarterback equation, because even though we've passed the Franco Harris era of it just being a halfback, a tailback, and a fullback doing all the work, these were still pretty run heavy offenses. Like, you would run to set up the pass. You would run to set up play action. It wasn't like, all right, we can run off of the pass, or we can pass regardless of the run. But once Marino really hit his stride in Miami and took off, that's when you started seeing people like Brett Favre mimic that. He's the guy who brought the pass-heavy offense to the league. And I think that when we're talking about the history of the QB position, you really can't do it without Marino. And it's unfortunate he doesn't have the Super Bowl win, but just being able to, and this was for a long time. I think he played for 17 years. For 16 of those years, he had sustained success as a high-volume passer. There's a reason why it took like Drew Brees and then I think Brady afterwards to break his passing records, even though we had entered into an era with people like Favre, with Manning, with all these with Ben Roethlisberger was a high-volume passer. All those guys still didn't break it until Drew Brees broke his yardage record back in the day. It's over 60,000 passing yards for somebody that played in the 80s and 90s. That's just unheard of.
Yeah, no, the yardage total is insane. Very similar to some of the older guys that we mentioned at the time when Dan Marino passed them. It was a monumentous moment. It was game changing, like you said, when Drew Brees and some of these older quarterbacks started passing these numbers. Because what Marino did for the game was, and I hate to say this, but I think that the last two slots, you like the more aesthetic thrower of the football. Like you like a gunslinger in terms of somebody who is throwing a beautiful ball. Joe Montana did not have near the spiral or the arm talent I think Dan Marino had. And that in of itself was extremely special, unprecedented, and really, I think, was almost a pivot point for the NFL in terms of like, we need to find these difference makers. Like this is the way the league is trending. And sure enough, the guys that I would put at those spots in the next two spots have come after Dan Marino. So understanding his impact is huge. What I go back to is he coached or was coached by one of the all-time greats who coached the only undefeated team in NFL history, and Don Shula. And so with that Dolphins team, with the coaching staff, there were times when they could have gone on a run. And he just never took over the postseason like I think you would have expected a player of his caliber to. Like we've seen Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady and some of these all-time greats rise to the occasion on these stages. And he did it. After that sophomore year, he wins the MVP. He throws for over 5,000 yards, sets some crazy records that aren't broken for like 20 plus years. Like he doesn't do that again. And so that for me is kind of the big hang up, even though he did so much for the game. His legacy is extremely impactful and he should be top 10 regardless of what list you're creating for quarterbacks. I think he misses out on the Mount Rushmore simply because I hate to use this as somebody who loves analytics, but that it factor. Like, again, this is a guy that just was not able to get it done in some of those bigger moments. And when you look at just quarterbacks in his own era, so like Joe Montana and Dan Marino, kind of contemporaries, how often were they considered like a top 5 quarterback when you look at some of these passer rating formulas that you can go back and start dating guys in their own era? When you look at a guy like Montana, he held that top 5 precipice for about 88% of the time, where a guy like Marino, it was only 75% of the time. So if I'm going to choose a guy from that era, it's going to be the winner, even though I do think Marino had a bigger influence on the evolution of the game, which is a big aspect of what we're talking about. For my number 3 spot, though, I know I've gone on a whole tangent of Marino, even going back to our number 2, Montana. For me, it's Peyton Manning. I think when he came in, he rightfully deserved the nickname he ended up getting, and that's the Sheriff. I mean, his pregame preparation, his pre-snap, just ability to diagnose, just so uncanny. This was a guy that was leading the quarterback film room very early on in his career. Like, it wasn't a worry necessarily of who the offensive mind was in the building. Like, Peyton Manning was running the offense. He was calling the plays. He was the offensive coordinator. And so when they got a great coach with Tony Dungy, who had, I think, got improperly fired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are looking to kind of get over the hump, and their gamble paid off. You can't really knock them for that. But Tony Dungy makes his way to Indianapolis, is able to kind of reshape the defense, and they go on a run in 2006. And I think that Super Bowl run really cemented Peyton Manning's legacy all time. When you look at the records that he's set, the MVPs that he has, like nobody's probably going to touch Peyton Manning's MVP record with 5 all time. And he is on a list with 2 Super Bowls, which I think puts him in good enough company. If he doesn't have that second ring, I think that is a big enough knock. And the postseason success is probably the biggest mar on Peyton Manning's record. But I think you can't talk about the NFL and some of these even current quarterbacks and a guy like Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow without talking about the influence of a guy like Peyton Manning and how so much of, I think, what Peyton Manning and Tom Brady were able to do allowed a coach and coaching staff to focus more on the defensive side. Those two had it handled and on locks from the offensive perspective. And I think they deserve their roses here. And I'm probably blinded from just growing up watching those two mostly. But for me, those two guys, you have to talk about them and their rivalry when you talk about the history of the NFL and the quarterback position.
For sure. When you think about Peyton Manning, like you said, 5 MVPs, right? I wouldn't be quick enough to say that nobody's going to touch that. We have a couple multi-time MVP winners in the league currently that I think are in their own classes in the league. So it would still take a ton for them to win 3 more, right? So 5 are really tough to get to there. 4 Super Bowl appearances as well, winning 2 of them. One of them courtesy of our Carolina Panthers. Unfortunately, with Tom Brady as well. That was one of his. That was his third one, right? Either way, really, really good quarterback, right? I like how you talk about the pre-snap stuff because while a guy like Dan Marino really introduced like big game hunter QBs into the league, like I think you can talk about Peyton Manning a little bit in that regard, just throwing down the field when he had the opportunity. There aren't as many like true diagnosticians today. Well, like Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, those kind of guys, even Tom Brady toward the end of his career. I think having somebody like Peyton who stepped in was able to highlight that kind of regard from the quarterback spot is allowing guys like Burrow who don't have a top arm. Even Dak Prescott, I would say, doesn't have a top like 5 or 10 arm. It's NFL worthy, but it's not the highest. But having the ability to see the play before it happens, it's kind of like Luke Kuechly, right? When you're able to do that, that affords you an extra, I don't know, like 5 units of torque or whatever you want to say on your arm because you know where the ball is going to go. You know where the defenders are. And that was Peyton Manning. But what made Manning special too was he had the strong arm. Like I think when you talk about these guys that diagnose, when you combine it with Peyton Manning and his ability and willingness to throw it down the field, I think that's what made him special. He didn't start out his career as this super smart guy who dissected the field and knew what was going to happen. In fact, he started his career more like Jameis Winston, throwing a lot of interceptions. But I think his growth throughout his career and then the growth really coincides with them finally making the deep postseason run because you got to remember that was the knock on Manning, right? Was, oh, he can't win a playoff game. He can't get to the playoffs. But once they got there in the Super Bowl, I think that was his 8th or 9th season. That's when it really took off for me. 3 more Super Bowl appearances since then. And while he's had some really good units around him, you can't do it without him. Like you saw the 2015 team when he missed, was it 5 or 6 games? The team was still winning with Osweiler, but it looked really, really bad. Like just him being behind center was a stabilizing presence that allowed that 2015 team, to go on the run and win the Super Bowl there. And I think a steadying presence is how I would describe Peyton Manning. And while that's not as flashy, I guess, as being a strong arm or a volume passer like Dan Marino is, it's important in its own right because it allows players today to be steadying presences who aren't necessary. It's like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, Manning and Marino, in terms of what they brought to the league, except Manning also has a strong arm. So like that's kind of how he's bucketed in there. Really good player for me. He would be number 5 on the list for me, but he just missed the cut because I kind of value the style of the other 2 QBs that I have on this list over somebody like Peyton Manning.
What's interesting is their sack percentage, despite playing in different eras, was the same, 3.13%. Again, when you talk about like some of the great quarterbacks, their pocket presence is a huge element that's not talked about. Everybody wants to talk about touchdowns and interceptions. And for number 4 for you, it's Mr. Touchdown Interception Ratio himself. Not a bad sack ratio, similar to Joe Montana, around 6%. But when we're talking about guys like Manning and obviously Dan Marino having super low ones, Brady is, I think, a little under 5% for his career. I think you definitely see it wasn't Rodgers' strength, but his arm talent and the way he threw the ball and his calculated risks were always something very enjoyable to watch. Why does he make the cut for you? Because I don't know if his career accolades, because it's looking like his career is winding down. He only has at most like a year or 2 left in the NFL, that he's going to necessarily catch some of these guys with the all-time. And if the argument truly is efficiency, is that enough of a boost to really put him above some of these other guys, especially when you have a Dan Marino on this list who I think threw the prettiest ball compared to his era, relatively speaking?
Well, if you want to talk accolades, who else do I have on the list? Dan Marino, right? Accolades don't mean 100% to me. It's how they impacted the game and how they were within their own era, right? We talked about Brady and Manning wasn't really in his prime anymore once Rodgers really hit his stride, but Brady still was. But even in that era, I think Brady stands out obviously for his longevity. And I think in terms of what I've seen, obviously I didn't watch Dan Marino because that was before my time. He actually quit playing when I was 1 year old. So I don't think I could have consciously watched him. But in my era, I think Rodgers throws the best ball of any QB I've ever seen. I think his ability to throw on the run is something that a lot of QBs since him have taken. Like we talk about Mahomes' ability to extend and throw on the run, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, these kinds of players. Rodgers was like the king of that, like moving out of the pocket and scrambling to throw instead of scrambling to scramble and get extra yards. I think he was the most like pinpoint precise thrower of anybody in that era. Like I think about all these game-winning drive throws that he has, where he's hitting a guy on the sideline while both of his toes are like falling out of bounds, but still on there. Hitting Hail Marys, that's not a precision thing, but he's like the Hail Mary guy and that kind of thing. Very calculated risk, as you put it, and he doesn't have like a barren shelf of accolades by any means. He has the I believe it's 3 MVPs, the lone Super Bowl, or 4 MVPs, excuse me, the lone Super Bowl win against Pittsburgh in 2010. So in between Peyton Manning's Super Bowls there, and I think just his ability to elevate and his ability to place the ball where nobody else could. I think I'm getting the nostalgia from Rodgers a bit, kind of like how you are with Peyton Manning. And for me, that's why he makes the list. It's unfortunate, like how he tailed off at the end of his career with the Jets with the late career injury. But even before that, like 2 years before that, he was doing some crazy stuff with the Packers. Before his last year at the Packers with Matt LaFleur, like he was on his way to having a second prime, so to speak. And I think it's unfortunate that he got injured. I think it's unfortunate that his, I don't want to say mental faculties, but I don't think he was all the way locked in on football at the end there. And if he were on a team right now, I wouldn't have him on the list because I don't have current playing players on the list. But I really think that throughout the 2010s, there wasn't a QB that was able to pull more rabbits out of the hat than Aaron Rodgers.
Yes and no. And this is I think, and you can make these arguments against Peyton Manning too in the postseason. The difference is Peyton Manning got the 4 Super Bowls. Aaron Rodgers didn't play on the AFC side where you have Tom Brady, you have Peyton Manning, you have Big Ben, you have these quarterbacks and these teams that are just stacked and loaded, and coaching staffs that know what they're doing. The NFC was always kind of a toss-up. And Aaron Rodgers was one of those consistencies in the 2010s that as long as he was healthy, the team didn't really go out and make big splash plays. So you had to kind of work with what you had.
Mm-hmm.
Never didn't get it done. 2014 in Seattle, there were a lot of mistakes made by Green Bay, not only by special teams and defense, but that offense. They could not put that game away. They had opportunities. They could not put the game away. Then you fast forward a little bit to, I think, even a more legacy defining. Tom Brady comes to Lambeau, trying to get ring number 7. Tom Brady throws 3 interceptions. Rodgers has a couple drives to go down and really make like a legacy-defining statement. Isn't able to do it. And again, like I said, I have a guy like Peyton Manning up here who has his blemishes from a postseason resume. But for me, we're talking about a guy that, as talented as he is, how much success he did in terms of getting a team to that championship game and just being non-existent there. Because those two I mentioned, there was another time against the Atlanta Falcons where I think they went up against them. I think it was 2016 and just couldn't get it done. And so it's just like, I don't want to keep nagging on him, but it was just that it seemed to be the hurdle that he could not get past, where Peyton Manning at least was able to get to the Super Bowl multiple times. And so when we talk about just career accolades, for me, when we talk about this list, I feel like you need an MVP, you need a Super Bowl, and you need some of these like higher numbers. And Rodgers has some of that. Like that I really do think at worst he's 6 or 7 on any top 10 list all time. Like the numbers and the career accolades are there. I just think it's a little bit short, especially when you look at like the percentage of time he spent his career as a top 5 quarterback. So where I mentioned a couple of numbers earlier about guys being in the 70s, 80%, he's at currently, when you look at where Rodgers is, 63%. He's under that 70% threshold that I think really is like a good criteria of like, hey, if your career was really that great, you really were a guy that stood out, you're going to be in the top 5 throughout the majority of your career. And I think he's just missing some of those numbers by just a hair or two.
When you put it in that kind of argument, I think what I would bring up is Manning, Brady, all the guys we mentioned really outside of Marino have famously led stacked teams. Peyton Manning had more help than probably any of the people we talked about outside of Montana, on the offensive side at least. The defense wasn't there until he went to Denver, but then he went to Denver and the defense was lights out, right? Aaron Rodgers didn't really have the multi Hall of Famers. Didn't have Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison. Then going to the Broncos, he didn't have the defense there. I think his coaching staffs also lacked in his time with the Packers. I don't want to talk about the Jets because that's their own debacle. But even with the Packers, like a guy like Mike McCarthy doesn't stand up to Tony Dungy, doesn't stand up to Bill Belichick or Shula or Bill Walsh. And then Matt LaFleur, as good as he is, he's not going to be up there with some of the coaching staffs of the other quarterbacks that we talked about. Like I thought it's not Bruce Arians, the guy that was before Bruce Arians with the Colts. He was good as well.
You're talking about Chuck Pagano?
No, he was after Arians.
Yeah,
right?
after. No, he was before, because you had Chuck Pagano and then he got cancer and then Bruce Arians was the interim and then Bruce Arians with Arizona. Yeah, no, you're good.
I think I'm misplacing things, but even on the Broncos staff too, like I thought those were sound staffs, especially the year that they won the Super Bowl. Obviously, John Fox couldn't get it done, and so they make the switch, but stuff was good there, obviously on the defensive side. But like all those games you mentioned, except for the Buccaneers game at the end, Rodgers like has famously gotten sold in a lot of the games. You want to talk about that Seahawks game? Sure, he could have led more scoring drives, but I mean, come on, like the onside kick, that kind of thing. I think Rodgers was up 2 scores with it was like 4 minutes and something seconds remaining. Didn't touch the ball again, and Seattle won. Like these are like legacy defining moments that some of the stuff isn't up to him. The Buccaneers game I'll concede, but
the Seahawks game is such BS because you're wrong. In regulation, he went out. It was like a 3-and-out. They kicked the ball back. Game got tied, or they fell down, and he had to drive down with a minute left to kick a field goal to send it to OT. And Richard Sherman's over there hobbling with his broken arm and trying to cover Jordy Nelson in the slot. Like he had a chance. Now in overtime, I don't think he had a chance. But in regulation, he did have the ball back, and that's how they were able to get the OT. So
are we talking about the same game?
2014, that onside kick.
Okay. I don't remember the Sherman broken arm thing, but for sure. Like I trust you on your historian things there. But the point I'm trying to make is out of all the QBs on both of our lists so far, the 2 that I have in Marino and Rodgers, I think did more with less. Obviously, Rodgers did more because he won a Super Bowl, 3 MVPs, that kind of thing. But the other guys also had good insulation around them. Yes, all of these guys elevated the talent around them, but Rodgers and Marino didn't have that same level of talent and were still some of the best QBs of their generation.
And if the argument is supporting cast, I get that. Because like you said, Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, Dallas Clark, the offensive line Peyton Manning had to work with, and then you go look at who he had in Denver. It's like, okay, yeah, that's why he won some of his most valuable players. That's why he set some of the records he did. However, I think when we look at impact of raising the ceiling of your team, that's where I get a little disconnected with Rodgers. When we talked about Brady and Montana earlier, and I think even Peyton Manning, his leadership qualities in the rooms, when you talk about Rodgers, he's a cancer. He was a huge reason why Mike McCarthy got fired. And I don't think he's necessarily a bad coach. We saw his work in Dallas. And then he had the riff with Matt LaFleur, has all the drama in New York. I don't think you would have seen that with some of the other quarterbacks that we've talked about, because we did see Brady leave New England. We did see Peyton Manning go to Denver. And so with all of those moves, there wasn't that I think just dysfunction that came at the locker room level. And just hearing with a lot of the personal relationships, that again is just something, and it doesn't impact who he was as a quarterback throwing the football. I'm just saying as a locker room presence, raising and elevating the talent on your team, I don't think he necessarily had that factor compared to some of the other guys we've talked about.
For sure. I think it's easier to raise better players as well.
Yeah,
and
that's
Peyton Manning's case. But as far as McCarthy goes, he had to go, like regardless of whether
at that
Rodgers
point. Yes, I'm just saying Rodgers sold the end of that season to make sure he got canned, and I was just like, really, like.
And then that's obviously not a good thing. But getting Matt LaFleur in there, I think, gave them more chances at sustained winning. You never want to sell a season. That's just poor sportsmanship. But it was something that had to be done. Even with the winning in Dallas, I don't think Mike McCarthy is a very good coach. But yeah, certainly Rodgers he caused some of the problems, especially toward the end of his career. He was more of a cause than he was a not an effect, but like a symptom of the problem, so to speak. But when we're talking about purely on the field, there's nobody as precise, nobody as calculated and as good of a downfield thrower in his era as Aaron Rodgers was.
I'll give you that argument. Like I said, the two spots you reserved were for like pure throwers of the football. I get the aesthetics. Like if you're really trying to leave like these are legacy defining guys that kind of I wouldn't say evolve the game in the sense of that guys are as accurate or precise as they are. I don't think you're necessarily
you can't really you can't evolve it in that way. I guess when I think of Rodgers, it's the game's never over with someone like him's on the field. I think Mahomes has kind of shifted some of that. Mahomes has also taken some of the scramble to throw stuff that Rodgers, he didn't like create scrambling by any means, but I think he was the first QB to use the scramble as a means to extend passing plays, be it like into the second play. Russell Wilson was also really good at that in his early career. Mahomes has certainly taken some of that. And like I said, if I were including players that are currently playing, I think I would have taken Rodgers off there. But because I think Rodgers is done, even if he ends up signing with the Steelers, like as far as his career is concerned, it ended at Green Bay because you tear your Achilles, 4 snaps into your New York tenure, and that really just destroyed that whole first year, even most of the second year. I thought toward the end of last year, he was playing good football. He and Davante Adams both in that December and last game in January, I thought they were playing decent football, but really the injury kind of submarined, so to speak, the end of his career. So I picture just the Green Bay tenure, but you have to include the rest of it because that's part of it, right? But as far, when I'm placing him on the Mount Rushmore, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like Peyton Manning wasn't good his last year in Denver. He happened to win a Super Bowl because his defense was an all-timer. But still, like I don't think of Peyton Manning 2015 as like I'm including that on Mount Rushmore. I'm including the Super Bowl win that he got, but I'm not including him just not even being able to throw the ball 10 yards down the field. Like that's not the Peyton Manning I'm including.
No, and I can completely understand that it is being a knock for that second ring. There's an asterisk next to it. He had, like you said, one of the better defenses carry him that year, and we had to be on the other end of that, unfortunately, as Panthers fans. The guy that I have at spot number 4, I think it's a little bit controversial, especially with what we're going to talk about shortly after. But I think when I made the illicit statement that like when we're talking about these guys, it's encompassing players that you really can't talk about the NFL or the history of the position without mentioning these guys. And what Patrick Mahomes did coming onto the stage in 2018, like 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns, like those were Dan Marino numbers like in his second year. And that was just kind of the pop that he came onto the stage with. And then the fact that he's now been the 5 Super Bowls,
5.
won 3, lost 2. He has 2 MVPs. Lamar Jackson's the only other active. Well, Aaron Rodgers is still active, but really guys with some space in their careers, like it's him and Lamar with 2 MVPs. And so you start looking at just these career accolades, both regular season and postseason, and just the trajectory that puts Mahomes on. And it's just hard to see him slowing down anytime soon. Like for me, it's like he gets another Super Bowl. He's in Montana Brady era. Like, and that is rarefied air. I don't think a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, heck, some of these younger guys in a Jaden Daniels, Drake May, they're ever really going to hit that 4 Super Bowl number. And I could be wrong. It's just like that is impressive. And I get that he's had Andy Reid. I get that he had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and all that. Alex Smith wasn't going to the Super Bowl. Like there's just an element of he came on and he was able to elevate the team in such a way. And it's not always because he's on cue or he's doing exactly what the play is asking him to, but his ability to just create magic in the backfield, move horizontally rather than just moving back vertically and keeping that pretty much, I would say the same, the latitude or longitude. I don't know what that line would be on the field, but you're keeping that same line so that when you're getting to these off balance throws, you're not throwing an extra 5-10 yards. And that's where you get the magic. And it's quite literally been one of the more entertaining narrative driving stories since he hopped on the stage. And to me, I don't think he can be excluded off the list. And I don't know who's going to come off your list in a couple of years once he's retired, once he's moved into that. But for me, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Montana, those are the 4 quarterbacks that they have qualities that I think every quarterback should be striving to have, whether it's their pre-snap process, whether it's how they manage the pocket, whether it's their big play ability or their ability to mitigate mistakes. The list goes on and on about these Hall of Fame caliber players. But for me, that's my Mount Rushmore.
For sure. Obviously, Mahomes, you mentioned like if he gets another Super Bowl, it's hard to leave him off here. He already has better careers than everyone we talked about except for Montana and Tom Brady. Like he's already approached that, and he's only been playing really for 7 years because the first year he was obviously the backup to Alex Smith. But you look at what he does, and it's not necessarily the strong arm, even though I would say he has a top 5 arm in the league. It's not necessarily that he's like a pinpoint accurate thrower or like a mistake mitigator like Rodgers was. Even though he doesn't make a ton of mistakes, right? Because he's able to scramble and find the play. It's the magic that you're talking about. It's always making the play. Like no matter the circumstances, he always makes the play. He could be getting sacked, like taken down to the ground. He'll find an outlet receiver. He could be getting chased by 3 or 4 players. He'll move. I think it was latitude is the horizontal one. He'll stay behind the line of scrimmage, and if there's nobody open, he'll scramble. And he's not a fast guy, but he's faster than the guy that's chasing him. Like that's his like permanent speed is X plus 1 mile per hour against who's chasing him. And he's been doing this since he was a starter, right? You talked about coming onto the scene, rather. 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns his rookie year. This was the year Drew Brees was like, all right, yes, finally I'm getting my MVP. Nope. Patrick Mahomes in his first year as a starter skunked him. You talk about some of his volume stats. I was looking at comparing Marino and Rodgers to Mahomes' yards per games. Mahomes has 289 yards per game. Marino's was 250. And Marino was a guy that accumulated over 60,000 yards in 17 seasons. So, like, he's on track for the volume stuff already. Touchdowns as well. He already has a ton of touchdowns. If you compare him to Tom Brady, records or Super Bowls and all that stuff aside, he smokes all of Tom Brady's early career stuff in terms of touchdowns, yards, interceptions, all the percentages, because he's more efficient as well. I think if you amalgamate all the players that we've talked about so far, so Brady's just legacy, just a pure winner, right? Montana's leadership ability, Rodgers' pinpoint passing accuracy, low mistakes. Peyton Manning, I don't think Mahomes is as good a pre-snap guy, but he's not bad at it. I already mentioned Montana. Dan Marino's strong arm. If you like pull all that together, you kind of get Patrick Mahomes. And that's what makes him so special. It's not the fact that he has all these great attributes of all the Mount Rushmore guys that came before. It's the fact that he did that as soon as he stepped into the league, and he hasn't stopped doing it. I think you could say he had a down year this past year, even the year before that. He only had 27 touchdowns, but even in a year where his offense, and I was writing about the Chiefs today, their offensive statistics were closer to the middle of the league than the top. Like, I think they were 11th in EPA. They were 7th in success rate and 15th in points per game. So mid offense, but he's still like himself doing everything it takes to get them to win without a Tyreek Hill, with Travis Kelce being a net negative on the field last year. He was just horrible. So even when you're losing all your superstars on offense and with a bad offensive line this past year too, even with adverse conditions, he's still making the superstar stuff happen. He still made it to the Super Bowl this year. They almost three-peated. They obviously lose this year, get blown out, but I don't think that's 100% Mahomes' fault. When we compared the Eagles and Chiefs rosters, if we did an exercise back then before the Super Bowl, that if you took the QB and coach off the team and stacked the positions, who would win? We said the Eagles won every single position. So there's like a reason that the Chiefs lost this one. But if you go back and do that last year with San Francisco has most of the positions. Then the year before, even with the Eagles have at least half the positions, but he still finds a way to make it work. I think that's Mahomes' special ability. And I think when he retires, he's not only going to be at least the third guy. I know we're not ranking them. there's going to be an argument that he's number 2 or number 1 based on the track record that he's already had. If a fraction of that continues, he's well on his way to being at least having the second greatest legacy of all the QBs.
We talk about, I at least know, like, off air, like, part of the reason why Tom Brady is the GOAT is the 28-3. Mm-hmm. And part of what makes Mahomes special, and he's been doing it since he came on the stage, like his first Super Bowl run, he's down 24-0 at home against the Houston Texans. Don't sweat it. They had it tied up by halftime, and they won that game. They were down 10 in the AFC Championship game against the Tennessee Titans. Came back, won that. They were down 10 against the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl. Came back and won that. Then you go back a little bit ahead of that. I think it was the actual following year. The Buffalo Bills 13 seconds happens. 13. I don't care what Brady's done. The march down the field like that, even with a full arsenal of timeouts, and put yourself in a position to kick a field goal instead of the overtime is insane. That's just it's mind-boggling to wrap your mind around. And then the last 2 Super Bowls you talked about that they did win. The Eagles, they were down 10 points at one point. It was 24-14 in the second half, and they came back and won that. And so
they were down against the Niners as well.
Yeah,
every Super Bowl win has been a fourth quarter comeback for Patrick Mahomes. So if you want to knock him for not dominating like some of Brady's teams have, I guess that's the course you can take. But he finds a way to win the majority of the time. I think the 2 Super Bowl losses, you see his offensive line under siege. He's not necessarily as accurate as he has been in those 2 games. We can say he played quite bad in this last Super Bowl because that's true, but the entire Chiefs roster played bad. Like the Eagles were just classes better at every position, and it ended up in a bad loss with the worst. That wasn't even the worst part of the game. The worst part of that game was the score bug at the bottom. It looked like it got whipped up on a Microsoft Word document in about 1 minute. But even with those losses aside, let's take away the wins and stuff like that. Let's say he's only made it to 2 Super Bowls and lost them both. Well, that's still somebody who's made it to 2 Super Bowls, lost them both, and has 3 MVPs, or 2 MVPs, excuse me, this early in his career. But then you tack on the Super Bowl wins, the Super Bowl MVPs. He's got 3 of them. And so all that stuff in 7 years of starting, it's just incredible. And I think that it's only going to continue.
The one thing we haven't mentioned is this guy hasn't missed the AFC Championship game since being the starter.
Mm-hmm. And he hosted all but one of them.
Mm-hmm. And he won that one on the road against Baltimore, arguably a better team. It's insane how many times he's up against the odds, and him and Andy Reid find a way. And it was Andy Reid always had the ability to kind of get to the doorstep, but he could never get over that hump. And Mahomes has been able to do that. And that just shows the value of the quarterback position. I think the value he adds, and the head in the Purrfect Takes as we're wrapping and winding this down. I think I had a perfect take a couple months ago after the Super Bowl. He's going to be right back in the AFC Championship game. But how confident I am that he's going to bounce back, and you have guys like Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, and you have this new shaped offense. And I think Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are really going to get into the lab this offseason and really improve. He's going to put up an MVP caliber season. I think he's going to finish top 3, top 5 in voting. I'll say top 3 to make it a little bit spicy, because anything can happen down the stretch with some of these MVP votings. Sometimes it's based on records. Sometimes it's based on some of these efficiency metrics. But I think he's going to be in that conversation again, because, again, people are forgetting just how good he is. The team won 15 games last year. And don't get me wrong, the last thing that we remember is a bad taste in our mouth. But this isn't a bad team. They were getting their best shots left and right from everybody over the past little bit, especially this past year. And they were still pulling it out. So I'm not going to count this team out. Like I said, I think he's a top 4 quarterback all time, and it's only going up from here. Is there anything that you want to kind of add to that? You taking the Purrfect Take in a different direction?
I'm going to take my Purrfect Take and bounce off that one and come back to it. Because of all of the players that are still playing that have a chance to get on the quarterback Mount Rushmore, Mahomes is the obvious guy, right? If I didn't have the rule that it had to be only former players, he would be on mine probably. With that in mind, I think there's another guy out there that could also make it. It's somebody with 2 MVPs, no Super Bowl appearances yet. But I think what Lamar Jackson does as far as a dual threat quarterback goes. We talked about dual threat players at the beginning. He's like easily the best dual threat QB of all time, in my opinion. I think he's the best passer and one of the best runners of that bunch. And I think that if he continues to play like he did last year, where you talk about there are reasons that people win MVP. There's a reason that he didn't win MVP last year, but he was like far and away the best quarterback in the league last year. If he continues to play like that, the sky's the limit for him, and he'll be the best dual threat player, quarterback of all time. I think that the AFC Championship, this is going to be my take. I think that all the hype we've been talking about with Mahomes, you can call it glazing if you want. I think that they're actually not going to be in the AFC Championship, because I think it's going to be between the two. We should consider these two teams the favorites of the AFC, Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens. So that's going to be my take, is that the AFC Championship will be played between those two QBs, the top two MVP finishers, the past two MVPs, and one of the guys, Lamar Jackson, I think could end up on this Mount Rushmore if his career trajectory continues. Like if he gets a Super Bowl win, another MVP or two, and continues to be as good as he is, both running and passing the ball, like it's wraps. I talk about how precise Rodgers was and how his low mistake percentage, like how he always does the correct thing. Lamar Jackson had a season like that this past year. And he added almost, 800 yards rushing, and I think 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns. So if he's able to do that kind of season, like even just 2 or more times, he's far and away the best dual threat guy of all time. So that's my take, is that Lamar Jackson, who could be on this Mount Rushmore, if Josh Allen starts winning more MVPs and wins some Super Bowls, he could be on here as well. The two guys that could be on here are going to be in the AFC Championship next year, not Patrick Mahomes.
I like this take, and not because it conflicts with mine and gives us some rooting interest here, but the fact that it's the two guys that are vying for potential spots on Mount Rushmore, the only guys I think currently in the era that, like you said, have an argument. And we didn't get to that at this point in the episode. We were running a little long, but it is right. Like Lamar Jackson, he's won MVP twice. He's the only quarterback or only person to win MVP unanimously. Like that is very impressive feats in and of themselves. He is changing the way the game is played. Like obviously we've talked about the rushing quarterbacks that kind of got to here, but now we're seeing guys like Jaden Daniels come into the league playing exactly like he is, manipulating defenses the same way. And it's giving like defenses problems they don't know how to answer. And so it is really cool. It is game changing. And like you said, he continues to do this. He racks up a couple more of the accolades. He deserves to be in the conversation. So we'll see if they're able to get past Mahomes, because that's been their issue right now. And if Mahomes continues to be kind of the person at the gate that's not allowing them to pass, I think that just more like solidifies why he's on Mount Rushmore even before retiring. But I might be going too far there, but again, it's just they have yet to break through that wall, and I think that means something.
When we talk about the AFC West in like a month or so, whenever we do the division breakdowns, I think you might change your mind, just because once you review the state of the Chiefs roster, that's all I'll say. But as far as today goes, this was the start of the Mount Rushmore installment. They won't necessarily be back-to-back-to-back episodes for the next 10 or so episodes. We'll sprinkle some more stuff in there, but it was really fun. The next one we do for sure, I think, will be running back, and if we wanted to include the O-line units in front of them, it would be like a two different Mount Rushmores, O-lines and running backs, because as great as running backs are, it's so dependent on the blocking in front of them. So we'll have to talk about that next time we do a Mount Rushmore. But until then, you can find us on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. Get your content there, and we will be back Thursday with either that Mount Rushmore or something else. So stay tuned and keep pounding.